At one of my recent showings, I was walking through behind the buyers, and I could tell as soon as they walked through that house that their eyes just lit up. And I knew that in their minds, they were like, this is the one. Everything looked beautiful. Inside the kitchen was completely renovated with really nice appliances. The cabinets were nice. All of the baseboards were perfectly painted. You know me, I'm a big baseboard freak. So, well, if you don't know me, I like really nice, clean baseboards. It drives me nuts. I like them to be perfect. And the floors were nice. Everything just looked really, really great in this property. Even the bathrooms were done. But as I am walking through the house behind them a little bit more, I start opening closets, and I opened the closet with the hot water heater, and I could tell it was a little bit older. I opened the closet with the AC, the HVAC system, and the filter was really old and dirty. And I also went outside and looked at the roof, and I could tell that it was a bit older roof. Now, I am not an inspector or any of those systems types of contractors. I'm not a roofer or a plumber or an electrician, but based on my experience, and that's over 20 years of selling real estate here in Miami-Dade and Broward, I can tell you that something would probably come up on the 4-point inspection. And since these buyers needed insurance because they were getting financing, I was a little bit concerned. If you're buying a house in Miami, it's very easy to get really caught up in a lot of those cosmetic renovations. And of course they matter. But if you need financing and you actually want to get insurance, then the major systems sometimes matter even more than those big cosmetic renovations. Because while the kitchen may be brand new, if the roof is old and cannot pass a 4-point inspection, it is going to be very hard to purchase that property with financing because you need insurance to get financing. Now, you can pay cash and just deal with it after closing, but it's just something to be aware of that sometimes people don't think about. So let's start with the roof, because the roof is one of the most important systems in the property, and it can be one of the most expensive. And I always tell people, before you go renovate an entire kitchen, if you have a very limited budget, especially if you're trying to sell a property, I would focus more on these major systems than doing all the renovations inside, especially if you're trying to appeal to buyers who need financing, because they're going to need these systems to pass the 4-point to get insurance. I'll probably say this 1,000 times in this video, sorry, but this is the point. And a lot of times people don't realize this until they actually go under contract on a property. And sometimes sellers don't realize it either because they've owned the property for a long time and this was just really never on their radar. So these are the things that I like to look at when I'm looking at a roof. Now, I will start by saying that I am not inspecting the roof. I'm not a roofer or a home inspector. That's not my job, but I'm definitely going to stand out in the driveway and have a look and see how it looks. The other thing that I'm going to find out about the roof is how old is it? When was it replaced? Was it completely replaced or just repaired? Are there permits? And do we have any information about previous leaks or water intrusion? Now, if there's not a permit on file, that's another discussion that we need to talk about. But it's really important, I think, if you are replacing a roof and you're trying to get some added value on selling your property, please do it with a permit, because it's very hard for inspectors to evaluate the age of the roof when it was done without permit. So another discussion, but just something that I would think about. An old roof doesn't make the house bad, but if the roof has only a few years of life left in it, you are definitely going to want to pay attention to that, because you're probably going to have to replace it in the next couple of years. And one thing that people are sometimes not aware of is after closing, your insurance company will come back around and re-inspect the property just to see what they've insured. And if they also notice that the roof is old and they're not happy with it, they can actually ask you to replace the roof, or they can cancel the insurance. The next thing that I think is really important to pay attention to are the items that require storm protection. So if you're being told that everything has complete 100% protection, you are definitely going to want to make sure that you can find the labels and the markings. Is there documentation? Were permits pulled for the installation? And these are some details that you'll definitely want to find out. Your inspector will also verify this for you, but I'm really just talking about prior to going under contract and spending a lot of time and money on inspections. Is there any way they can show you this information? The reality is there could be a property that, has a lot of interest and you might not be able to get all of this information in advance. And that's really up to you to decide if it's worth going under contract or not. But if we have time and it's not like a bidding war, these are some of the details that I like to dive deep into for our buyers. Next, let's talk about the electrical, because this is a really big deal. Sometimes people like to do renovations where they do all the renovations cosmetically, but then they don't update the electrical panel in order to function for those renovations. And if you've ever owned a property before, that can sometimes mean trouble. If you can, find out what type of electrical panel it is. How old is it? Was electrical work done as part of the renovation? Were permits required? And if so, do they have the permits? Just a few questions that you want to ask. You may not get all of the answers to these questions, but these are things that I like to know for our buyers. Next, you want to ask about the plumbing, what type of plumbing it is, how old is it? And if you think about a bathroom, sometimes people are very surprised to find out that, a lot of times when people renovate, especially in our area, they're not necessarily going underneath the house. Sometimes some of the plumbing is in a concrete slab and they're not digging up very often. They're not digging up that concrete slab to start replacing plumbing inside of it. So a lot of times the plumbing that is replaced with renovations here is the plumbing that you can kind of see, or maybe inside the wall behind the drywall. So just know that when you do a home inspection, I would definitely recommend to do the plumbing scope too, just to have someone double check that for you. If you are thinking about the electrical or the plumbing, it's really good to ask the seller for that information, because if you think about it, even though an inspector is inspecting the property, they're not cutting into the walls to check every single electrical situation behind every single, drywall or wall inside of a room. And they're definitely not doing that for plumbing either. They will check the plumbing and the electrical that is exposed. And that is a discussion that you can talk to the inspector about, how deep they can go into that inspection for you. But just know that whenever there's work done on the property, if you can't find the permits or you're looking for some very specific information, it may not be like 100% the whole electrical system was replaced. Maybe it's just the panel, or every single pipe in the house was replaced. It might just be the plumbing that was needed to replace to do that renovation. Next, the HVAC system. This is pretty simple for Florida because we live in Florida and I don't think many people here can live without air conditioning. It's very important here. And another thing that you want to ask about is how old is it? When was it replaced? When was it last serviced? Sometimes you can see the last service date actually on the panel. Some companies will add in the last service date. Also, you can see the filter to see if it's clean or not, because if it's really super dirty, then, the likelihood that it's been maintained is probably not very good. Just, little details to look at as you're looking through the property. All of these systems matter when you're buying a house in South Florida: the roof, the electrical, the plumbing, the HVAC system, and the storm protection. All 5 of these things really matter a lot because they will make the property eligible for insurance or not. And then if they're not eligible, if there's an issue, then maybe you or the seller will have to work something out when you're under contract in order to get insurance to close. You don't want to fall in love with a property if you're walking in and you see everything's renovated, but the major systems are not renovated, and that's important to you. Sometimes sellers will say to me, oh, everyone will just pay cash here. That's not necessarily true, especially for single family homes. Over the last 6 months, about 76% of buyers who closed in Miami-Dade, they did need some type of financing. So you really want to make sure that if you're buying a property and you do need financing, that you know the questions to start asking earlier so you don't waste time on a property that you ultimately can't buy. And listen, home inspections can be expensive depending on how detailed you want to go. And so I just feel bad when people spend a lot of money on a home inspection and they just didn't pay attention to these details in advance, because a brand new kitchen is great, But if the roof is at the end of its life and it fails the 4-point, what's the point, really? My name is Jamey Prezzi. This is my husband, Ognjen Prezzi. You can find us online on Instagram at The Prezzis. And if you would like to download our free relocation guide, you can find that link for the guide in the information box below, as well as all of our contact information. That's it for today. We'll see you soon.